Subscribers to the PC Master Race subreddit will often tout a keyboard and mouse as an obvious benefit to gaming on a PC compared to a console, whereas consoles you're restricted to only using a controller. And if you're gaming on a PC, you have a lot more options for good third-party controllers that don't cost very much money. Take, for example, this ZDT wired controller. At just $20, I think there's a compelling case to be made here. Let's get the elephant out of the room first. You're not fooling anyone. This looks exactly like an Xbox 360 knockoff, and that's not actually a bad thing. The Xbox 360 controller is renowned as being one of the greatest gamepads ever made. So if you're gonna steal from somewhere, you might as well steal from the best. It feels a little bit cheap at first. It's extremely lightweight, and it almost feels hollow inside. It's so light. Yet despite being so light, it's extremely rigid, surprisingly rigid. Like, I'm putting some pretty significant force into trying to bend this thing, and there's no flex whatsoever. The buttons are very tactile and responsive. They feel fine. They feel exactly like buttons you'd find on a first-party Microsoft controller. However, there's a little bit of squishiness involved in the D-pad that I really don't like. It's very unpleasant, and it's just squishy, and they're not all consistent. They make different noises. So if I press left, there's a certain sound it makes, and if I press right, it's much more muffled. I'm using the same amount of force. Both work just fine, they register just fine, and they spring back perfectly okay. Some of the buttons take a lot of pressure to actuate that you're not expecting, and some are very easy to press, but overall it's a pretty small complaint. Then there's the fact that this thing lights up. There's this whole area up here that's known as the decorative light, and then all of the buttons on the right side also light up. A mode indicator down here at the bottom that tells you what mode the controller is in, and also a trigger light that activates on the bottom of the controller. We're gonna come back to this. But let's talk about what it does well. It has a very long, flat, tangle-resistant cable. It's about 2 meters long, or a little bit over 6 feet. If you're gonna be gaming on a console, that's definitely pretty close. But if you're gaming on a PC, on your desk, 6 feet's more than enough room. And it comes with this very convenient little Velcro that you can use to keep the cord nice and tidy when it's not being used. But let's talk more about these crazy lights. So there's two zones. There's a decorative light zone, and then there's the button zone. And you can control these independently. There's 3 effects. There's off, there's on, and then there's a breathing effect. They don't change color, they're not RGB. And one thing that kind of throws me off is the fact that there's red accents on the controller, but the lights are white, maybe even have a slight blue tint to them. You can turn them off if they are distracting to you, but I think they're kind of cool, especially if you're gaming at night. It's not really that distracting, makes it look a little more unique. It also offers a turbo function, which I haven't seen in a long time. Pressing this automatic turbo button right here in tandem with another button will then press that button multiple times over and over and over. So for fighting games or shooting games, maybe there's a scenario where that would be handy, but usually I just left it off. But let's also mention one of the most unique features of this controller. Around back, you'll notice 2 distinct little circles, and those are, in fact, buttons. Very nice buttons too. They have a very nice tactile feel to them. They definitely won't be pressed on accident, which is a problem you do run into with buttons on the rear of the controller sometimes. They're not buttons that you would map. They actually have 2 different purposes for being there. The one on the left activates or deactivates the linear trigger. So what that means is essentially a trigger works a little bit differently than a traditional button. A button is strictly on or off, right? There's no in between. The reason for a trigger is so you have more granular control between all the way off and all the way on. So in games like shooters, it doesn't really matter. You're pulling the trigger to fire a weapon. There's no in between. But racing games, it's a little bit more complicated. You want to have a lot more control over how much throttle and how much brake you're providing. It's not strictly on or off. So depending on the game you're using, you can make it a trigger, like a traditional trigger, or it can activate more like a button. And the button on the right here enables or disables the rumble. And the rumble is actually really good, but most importantly, it doesn't rattle. A lot of these cheaper controllers will introduce a lot of rattle, like they're rumbling so much they're gonna shake themselves apart. But let's talk about the compatibility of this controller. If you're buying it, its intended use is with a PC. Can you use it on other platforms? Yes. And it looks and feels like an Xbox 360 controller, and it actually registers as an Xbox 360 controller. You're going to download the Xbox 360 drivers, but oddly enough, it doesn't actually work on the 360 or the Xbox One for that matter, which is kind of odd considering it works on the PlayStation 3. Kind of strange. It also works on the Steam Link, and because it includes a tiny adapter, it can actually be used with many Android devices, tablets, and larger phones where you want to play a game and have more control. Then you can use this little adapter, plug in the USB, plug this other end into your Android device, and you have a controller. There are, however, a few problems with this controller. Something that I found interesting is this rubberized texture on top. And it's not that I'm not a fan of this texture, I actually am. I do like the way it feels. It does do a pretty good job of making this controller feel more expensive than $20. However, I feel like this texture should be on the bottom. On the bottom you have more of the glossy plastic, where the texturized portion that offers more grip is on top. But think about it. How much of your hand is actually touching the top of the controller? Not much. Most of your grip is placed on the back of the controller. So I understand maybe not doing the whole controller for cost reasons. Maybe this more texturized material costs more money. But if you're gonna do half the controller, do the half that you're actually gonna be grabbing onto, right? There's also a little bit of light bleed, especially when the lights are completely out. You will see a little bit of light leaking in some of the crevices, but it's really, really persistent here under the right thumbstick. If you move the thumbstick around, you will see a lot of light bleeding through there. It's also a little bit small. Now, it could be that we've gotten used to larger controllers. I'm pretty sure this is a standard Xbox 360 size controller, although it just feels a little bit smaller. So if you have bigger hands, this probably isn't going to work for you. It works fine for me. I think I have pretty average sized hands. However, if this doesn't work for you, they do offer knockoff versions of the PlayStation controller, the DualShock controller, the Xbox One controller, and they also offer wireless versions of those as well. It also has obviously no headphone input. I would be extremely surprised if it did at this price point, but just keep that in mind if you have a gaming headset and you're planning to use your controller to power your headset. That's not going to happen with this guy. It's also not very great for racing games for a couple of reasons. First of all, the turbo function is utterly useless. You don't need to use that whatsoever in a racing game. So that's kind of just wasted space and wasted money right there if all you do is play racing games. Also, the linear trigger control is also useless because you need that granular control if you're racing. As you can see here in this example, I'm driving along in this Lamborghini and I need extremely precise throttle to brake control in order to make this turn. Now if I try the same turn again with the linear triggers turned off, you can see as soon as I barely tap the brakes are completely 100% actuated, and the car locks up and it starts to slide and it completely ruins the turn. Same thing with the throttle. When I get back on the throttle, it's 100% down. It's my foot to the floor basically is what I'm telling the game. And it's very hard to keep control under those circumstances. So if you're playing a racing game, the linear triggers are completely useless to you as well. And also, speaking of the triggers, there's not a whole lot of travel here. As you can see, when I push down the trigger, there's not a whole lot of room there. So even if you have the linear triggers turned on, you don't have a whole lot of room anyway. So it's very hard to kind of keep the trigger in an in-between state because there's just not a whole lot of room there as compared to, for example, the Xbox One controller, where there's a lot more room. You have a lot more control of exactly where you want the throttle and brake to be. That's really it for racing games. If you play a lot of racing games, this probably isn't the controller for you. My second largest gripe with this controller are the buttons on the back. I think these are really cool, but they're a huge, huge missed opportunity. Imagine if you were able to remap these buttons back here. How huge that would be if you can make one of these buttons, reload or jump, then you can keep your thumbs on the thumbsticks and be able to perform those actions without making your thumb leave the thumbstick. It's the whole reason behind why the Xbox One has these paddles behind there, because they serve that exact function. But there's no software to be able to remap these buttons. I think that's a huge missed opportunity, especially with all the other functions that come on this controller. I think this is a much bigger deal than any of those other functions, and they didn't do anything with it. Literally, this turns on or off the linear triggers, and this turns on or off the rumble. That is all they do, and that's all they'll ever do. But let's talk about the worst thing about this controller, and it completely baffles me. This LED down here, this little light, is extremely bright, especially if you have all the lights off. And it turns on whenever you pull one of the triggers. And unlike the other lights on the controller, it can never be turned off. Now I know what you're thinking. Wow, wouldn't that be kind of distracting? Yeah. Yes, it would be very distracting. So distracting, in fact, that I have to turn my lights back on, because with lights off, it is so glaringly annoying that I have to turn the lights back on. Or a more practical solution may be to simply cover it with a little piece of electrical tape. But again, with all the functionality packed into this cheap controller, you'd think they would at least allow you to turn this thing off. In conclusion, this is a good $20 controller. A very good $20 controller with a lot of functionality packed in. It is only $20, but keep in mind that the Xbox 360 controller is currently selling brand new for $27. So for $7 more, you can get an actual 360 controller, which, depending on the features offered by either one, may be what you want or not. So if you only have $20 to spend, you don't play racing games, you don't need a headset, you like the features I mentioned here, and you have a roll of electrical tape handy, then this could be the controller for you. But thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to subscribe so you can check out future content on this channel. Also check out the links in the video description to find out where you can find this product on Amazon, and watch our previous videos where we review other budget-oriented tech, and you can check those videos out and find out where to purchase those items as well. Thanks again for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next one.